Welcome, everybody. This is our second video. We are going to be talking about what is the purpose of writing academically. So all of us are in some form educators who require writing in our classes or have and Candace, in your case, you experience writing across an entire university and all of these different faculty members who are requiring it in their classrooms. So what is the purpose of academic writing? Why do we make students do it?
Well, I could start. I think that from a writing teacher's perspective, the goal of teaching writing, well, there's a lot of them, but one of them is to help students, I guess, engage in an active discovery, that writing is a form of invention, that it is a way that we figure out what we don't know and figure out what questions to ask, and then find out ways to ask those questions and find answers. I think writing is also a way to develop empathy, maybe, or at least like social awareness, and to gain more self-awareness of ourselves as social subjects. So, when we're writing, we have to envision our audience and we have to think about what they need out of the exchange or what their positionality is. And then we have to reframe our messages and how we present ourselves, in order to have meaningful conversations with those audiences. And I think, at a more practical level, writing is also about just conveying information and being heard. So if you have complex information, finding ways to communicate it to various audiences, or, to get your message across so that things can happen. So writing is active and it makes things move. Most of the writing that I see is scientific or technical writing. And, for example, paraphrasing. I think it's really important that people learn how to paraphrase. And I think that paraphrasing is more than just, changing words around. Like, it's a way to learn. You're having to read the source and think critically about it. And those are really important skills. And then you're having to, put it into your own words in ways that maybe keep or change the meaning slightly, to fit your own purposes. So that's important. But if you already know how to paraphrase, and if you're pretty good at it, and if the whole point of scientific communication or technical communication is to write in the simplest terms possible already, I do wonder, is there going to be a point when using software like this to do a skill like paraphrasing would be acceptable, and where maybe it's not, necessarily harming a student's education to be able to use these tools at certain stages in their academic or professional careers, once they've kind of gained, the ability to understand what it is that they're trying to do.
That makes me think of, and I think this comparison has come up over and over again in the things I've been reading and hearing, but the calculator, right? And there, I have young children. I have a first grader and a sixth grader. And at this point, neither of them are doing math where they are allowed a calculator during the math, because they're still learning those foundational skills. Where, like, obviously, if you were just doing an addition problem like my kindergartner, or even like more complicated algebraic equations like my sixth grader, if you had a calculator, you could just plug them in and get the answers, but you're not learning how to do that computation. And so math teachers for a long time have had checkpoints where they're like, okay, once you have demonstrated this level of knowledge, now you can use this part of the tool. And I remember being like having to hand graph things, and then them being like, okay, now you can use a graphing calculator because you've proven that you understand how to do it manually. And so I wonder if there will be similar checkpoints for these tools in academic spaces.
I agree. And Michelle mentioning the calculator, when I tutored students in math, oftentimes in preparation for the SAT, and this was at the time when it was transitional, so there were some parts you could use a calculator for and some parts you couldn't. Or most notably, once they got to Algebra 2 trigonometry, where you had to do factoring, there were problems that we didn't have calculators that really were good at dealing with those, and it's very hard to like punch in that type of notation for factoring. And so it is much better to know your times tables, so this way you can experiment and try plugging things in. And I would actually take the calculator away from the student and set it aside and say, we are going to work on this by hand, because what I would see when they encountered a problem, they would just start punching in buttons on the calculator, and they would be doing it in an exploratory way, so they wouldn't actually know like have a framework or have a hypothesis to test. And that's definitely one of the risks. If you don't know the basic theory behind how something works, whether it's writing or mathematics, then you can't sanity check what the tool produces. And we see this already with spell check. How many of us have seen the accidental spell checks and accidental autocorrects? There's whole forums for that. The number of times I see the word defiantly listed when they mean definitely, and my favorite word is weary, the love child of wary and leery, which means neither of them. One of those would be perfectly fine, but not weary. And so we already see what happens when people who don't know how to spell or who don't know how to double check the writing get tricked or get misled by tools that we have. And so I completely agree that that it's important to have that basic understanding and knowledge. To add to that, there's the importance of having authentic self-expression, of being able to say, I want to communicate this thing. How do I communicate this? And being able to actually communicate it and have that be in a persistent format. And this is why for my classes, most students turn in typed essays, but I try to leave it open to audio recordings, slide presentations, and other formats, because my goal is for learners to be able to produce something that is persistent, something you can package up and give to somebody else. I think that we want to encourage people to recognize that, yes, I'm struggling with this. We're going to continue to do it. And even if you don't become, a virtuoso writer, I mean, we've got Hemingway, so, the bar's fairly low, but that if you practice it, you are going to get better at it.
Completely agree with everything that you have both said about why we do this, why we ask our students to do tasks that are sometimes feel a little arbitrary, or might feel, especially, I think when I was a college professor, I had students that were not in a humanities program, were in a lot of technical programs. They were like, I am never going to have to write an essay professionally. This is never going to be asked of me. Why do I have to take writing 101? Like, why do I have to do this? And I think that for me, part of it was solidified by watching students. I was teaching at a community college, and a lot of students did not have their own computers, and they were doing everything on smartphones. And they would even like try to type in like essays on smartphones. And some of them were way more proficient at that than I would ever be. But I was just paying attention to how much those devices were turning them into consumers of media rather than producers, and how much it was creating this power differential in how people experienced the world. Because if you are always a consumer, then you don't see yourself as somebody who has something to contribute. And I think that part of being in a democracy is seeing yourself as worthy of having something to contribute to the conversation. So I don't want to be too idealistic about my profession, but I do think that teaching somebody to write and helping them harness their thinking and organize their thoughts and put together an argument is also about helping them see themselves as a participant in a larger society, in a larger conversation. And I worry about these tools being so effective that people don't feel the need to put up with that frustration and go through that work. And I worry about what they'll lose in that process, because I don't think that will be true for everybody's kids. I think there will be students who are definitely getting high quality writing instruction that isn't going to involve ChatGPT submitted prompts. And I worry that we'll see a even larger split in like wealth disparities and access to good educational environments.
Yeah, I definitely want us to have a further discussion about that, the consumer versus user versus producer or creator dynamic, and I because that is incredibly important, and it's very very stark with what we're seeing here, and the access issue is definitely a big ethical issue I'm concerned about too.
Oh, I was going to point out I think it was a link that you put in, Sabrina, into our little document of resources. It was the Evan Pushak, I think is how you say his name. Escape into Meaning is his book. He had a video called The Real Danger of ChatGPT, and he was talking about the difference between writing and editing, which I think is relevant to this conversation too. And he had this quote: "Language is how human beings understand themselves and the world. Writing is how we understand uniquely. Not to write is to live according to the language of others." And so I really was thinking about that, writing is giving yourself a voice. Like, learning how to harness language is learning how to harness power in a way that doesn't, it is tied to class and economics and all of those things because of course we've made it tied that way, but it is a place where we can grab power in ways that have not always been accessible. And so I think that it is an important equalizer. I think it is an important place to cause disruption, and I don't want that to be lost, that ability to be lost, especially since it won't be lost across the board to this same extent.
I agree that when you have more control and more choice over what you are writing and producing, you at least you have the potential to challenge power structures. And I think that that's one thing that I would say to appeal to our learners, especially our teen learners, because I know this from running Dungeons and Dragons and other RPG games, and from other situations that teens, I remember this, teens want to be creative. They want to feel like they're creating something new and completely novel, and they want to be authentic to themselves, and that is great. And the way that you do that is by building up a bank of knowledge and then producing and creating things. But if you are using somebody else's tools, then you are only playing with those tools that are created. You are not actually able to create as authentically and creatively as you want. And so that's something that I would definitely mention to tween and teen learners, is that be aware of how you're being limited and restricted as a consumer of a particular technology or set of writing tools.
That's beautifully said. Today at work, I was talking to a colleague, and he had recently been to a big conference in rhetoric and composition. There's those of you out there, it's called 4Cs. Michelle know about it. But he came back and he had seen a talk by Cheryl Glenn, who's one of my favorite rhetoricians. And she has a book called Rhetorical Feminism and this thing called Hope. And she writes a lot about hope. And somehow, probably because I was doing this tonight, I was thinking about how hope relates to, AI text generators. And I was thinking that, like when we write or create in any form, it really is an act of faith and hope, in the sense that we're hoping somebody will listen to us. And I too worry that not only might we lose our ability to engage and maybe disrupt, but just we might lose the ability to just be hopeful people, to believe in the possibility of attachment to others through creation. So, I do think that there's a real danger there. And just like the feeling of joy, which is another very human emotion, like I like to feel joyful. And I think that especially when you're younger, when you're like an adolescent and you're learning to be creative and really put yourself into it, you get a lot of pride and joy from the things that you create. And that can sustain you through a lot of hard things. So I wouldn't want anybody to lose that either.
That makes me think another thing that same author said in that video was that he thinks that English teachers will soon have to answer questions that math teachers have always been answering. When will we ever use this in real life? And I was thinking about how many times I've been asked that as a teacher, and I've had ready answers, right? Well, you're going to have to send emails to your boss. You're going to have to write cover letters. You're going to, and this conversation is really making me think about how superficial those responses to the students were. And one thing that I think I'm kind of thankful for is that ChatGPT is going to take that away from me. Like, I'm not going to be able to say those easy superficial answers. I'm going to have to say the kinds of things that we just said, right? Well, you deserve to participate in democracy. You deserve to have hope that somebody is going to listen to what you have to say. You deserve to discover your ideas and figure out what you don't know. And it might be a harder sell, but it is a more honest answer. And I think that it's good that we're having to examine that and dig deeper to give that response.
Also a growing cynicism about the standardization and I mean, really almost the automation or roboticization of humans. And Candace, you had mentioned this earlier on about the technical writing and academic writing, how it has to be very standardized. And I think about Michel Foucault talking about disciplining, and that I got to see this at some conferences where they were talking about algorithms used in a medical context. So this was maybe five or 7 years ago, and they were talking about very similar things as we were, and it made me wonder when they were talking about how sometimes a machine is better at diagnosing a patient than a human because of human bias. How in the medical profession and many different professions we try to make people standardized in their thinking, in their communicating, in all of this, and that we're trying to stamp out that human bias. And in many cases, we need to get rid of that bias. Black women are much more likely to die of pregnancy and pregnancy-related complications in the United States. Black people don't get enough pain medication and consideration. So there are absolutely these issues. But what are we trying to do when we want people to produce and create in that standardized sort of way? And if we keep insisting that in order to succeed in this world, in this capitalistic, semi-fake capitalistic society, that you have to abide by all of these, you have to conform to all of these standards. Should we be surprised when a computer is able to do it as well as, or possibly even better than the humans do? And I was asking the question about why do we think this is so impressive? Partially because I think that we need to also look at ourselves, and not us personally, but recognizing the reason why the ChatGPT essays seem so good is because a lot of writers are not very good, and a lot of students are struggling with writing. I know from first years in college, a lot of them struggled with a basic essay format. And so I could see that what ChatGPT produces could, at least grammatically, appear to be much stronger than what a lot of students are creating. At the same time, the evaluators, the teachers who are reading the essays, a lot of teachers, and I know college professors especially, skim. A lot of them don't actually read through essays. And part of that is a bad habit we learn in academia, to skim through articles and skim through abstracts. But in general, I've been seeing some interesting discussions about deep reading and deep cognition, and how most of us do not put enough attention into the things that we read, and that we are so used to skimming and doom scrolling and all of that through phones, through looking at articles, that we don't have the attention spans to really focus on reading a deep article, and instead we look for a short synopsis, or we just skim through things and don't actually dig deep into it. And that is part of why we are so impressed by ChatGPT's output, because we ourselves are not actually reading and thinking deeply.
In the most practical way, I think a lot of us pursue an education, especially a higher education, for social and economic mobility. Like, we want to get jobs and we want to support our families, and maybe, we want to have a good life where we feel like we are secure. And so I think another kind of layer to this is acknowledging that we also kind of have to be prepared for whatever the professional world does with this. And we don't really know what that's going to be yet. I mean, different careers are using these things in different ways. And I think it will be a while before we know to what extent, different jobs are going to be incorporating these kinds of things. But I do think that we should probably watch that carefully, and then have really honest conversations with students throughout their educational, careers, about just, how is this being used out in the world? How is it being used in the professions that you want to pursue? How do you feel about that? Ethically, I think we should talk with them about ethics. Like, ethically, does this bother you? Because I think that this may end up influencing how people choose career paths. Like, people who want to go into a more creative field, like maybe digital content development or something like that. If the field is going to completely transform over the next few years, it might not be as appealing to those people anymore. And we might need to create like different avenues for people to pursue their interests and have fulfilling careers. So that's the only thing I would add.
And I would say that, as in the double of just being a parent generally, and then also being a homeschooling parent, which adds the layer of feeling, I mean, I am not solely responsible for my children's education, for one thing. They are also responsible for their education, but I also, outsource and connect with other community members. But there is an added pressure of knowing that I'm the person who is responsible for my children's education. And I don't feel prepared, but I don't think anybody can be prepared, because I truly have no idea what kind of career field I'm sending my children out into, or what kind of jobs will be available, or if there will be jobs available. And so I panic about it a lot, and things like this cause me to panic. But I also just step back and try to take some comfort in knowing that what I believe about writing is something that matters no matter what is happening. I believe that critical thinking matters regardless of what's going on. I believe that being able to share your own ideas and tell your story and figure out what you think and discover your own ideas through writing is important no matter what else has happened. So I try to find that as an anchor in some ways, but I would be lying if I didn't say that just like being a parent, knowing that you're sending your kid out into a world that what was the word you said in the last video, Sabrina? The accelerate acceler
Accelerando.
accelerando, right? Like parenting during the accelerando is not fun. I mean, when is it all
Everyone
gonna
parents during an accelerando. Our parents parented during what the CD and DVD and digital era, and yep. Yep. Uh, so on a practical matter, I think that being able to write in some sort of a structured way, whether it's an essay or whether it's a synopsis or an abstract or what have you, is important in the same sense that code switching is important, even if you disagree with the restrictive structures of a particular field in adult land, which we all do, that in order to get in the door, in order to be heard, in order to get a spot at the table, you have to be able to do that code switching, which comes from racial and ethnic identity, and especially people of mixed race have to be able to switch their context, switch their ways of communicating. But I see code switching as also a part of writing. Candace, you had mentioned this about being sensitive to who your audience is and being able to speak to that particular audience effectively, and you're probably going to have to change how you speak depending on which audience you have. And so being able to communicate and express yourself through writing or through an essay or some sort of structured communication is still going to be an incredibly vital skill to get in the door, so that you can then let people know who you are and know about all of your other skills. And the reality is that there are many places in this world that, one, do not have internet access, and two, will not have access to ChatGPT. And so being able to write at least a basic proficient level, regardless of what kinds of technologies you have, will mean that you will be flexible, you will have more opportunities. On that horrible day when the internet goes down at the office, you will still be able to be effective, and that has a great deal of value in it. So that would be my answer to why we still need to teach writing, and why we need to teach writing in different styles and different levels, because it is that very essential practical tool to give us that access.
All right, so there are our thoughts on the purpose of writing academically and what maybe some goals you should have if you are working on designing your own writing curriculum or finding one that fits for your family. In our next video, we're going to be talking about the strengths and weaknesses of using AI writing tools. So I hope you'll check that one out.